The hegemony fleet arrived in silence. 1,000 warships cutting across the black void like blades of obsidian. From the command spire of the flagship Dominion's Claw, Admiral Krevther studied the pale blue sphere below, his crystalline eyes narrowing with disdain. The target was green, lush, and raw with oceans, exactly the sort of backwater world the hegemony prized for its minerals and biosphere. To him, Earth was nothing more than a resource farm waiting to be stripped. Primitive, he rasped, his mandibles clacking as he turned to his sub-commanders. No orbital platforms, no planetary shield grid. They burn fossil fuels. They fling chemical projectiles. A species still in its infancy. His officers chittered in agreement, amusement rippling through the bridge like static. The invasion would not be a campaign, merely a harvest. On the surface, General Marcus Heil watched the skies from a fortified bunker beneath Colorado granite. The years weighed heavy on his frame. The gray in his hair earned in the deserts of the Middle East, the jungles of Africa, and the endless counterinsurgencies humanity had waged against itself. Yet his eyes were sharp, his voice steady as he addressed the officers around him. "They're here," he said simply. The air vibrated faintly with the thunder of descending warships. Around him, the younger commanders shifted uneasily. Against fleets that could cross the stars, what chance did humanity's patchwork defenses stand? Hale set his jaw. Humanity had been underestimated before by empires, tyrants, armies that thought they could break the human will. They had all failed. Above the atmosphere, Krevther gave the order. The first orbital bombardment began as lances of plasma flared from the warships, their brilliance streaking downward through the cloud cover. On the bridge, his officers leaned forward in anticipation, eager to watch cities burn and defenses crumble. But what happened next was not in their simulations. The bombardment never reached its intended targets. As the vanguard ships maneuvered into firing formation, the blackness of orbit came alive. Whole swaths of debris-scrap satellites, husks of derelict rockets, even rocks propelled from automated launchers erupted from hidden dispersal fields. They were crude, inelegant, and utterly devastating. A destroyer in Krevther's forward line shuddered as a cluster of tungsten rods ripped through its hull, tearing through reactor cores with the fury of kinetic gods. Another ship was split in half as a defunct space station, guided by retrofitted thrusters, slammed into its flank at orbital velocity. Krevther rose from his command chair, mandibles twitching. "What is this madness?" He snarled, his crystalline eyes flickering with alarm. From Earth's command bunker, Hale watched the incoming data feeds. The Dadri fields had triggered exactly as planned, the kinetic counter-satellites performing with brutal precision. His lips pressed into a thin line that might have been a smile. Humanity had littered its orbit for decades with junk, relics of past endeavors and failures. Now, those failures had teeth. "Admiral," one of Krevther's officers stammered, "the humans, they've turned their orbital refuse into weapons." "Impossible." Krevther hissed. Yet the viewports told the truth. Warships designed to duel in deep space were bleeding fire, gutted not by advanced energy weapons, but by dead metal hurled at unimaginable speed. In the silence of the bunker, General Howell folded his arms. "They think us primitive," he muttered, his voice gravel. "Let them. They don't understand what desperation makes of a species. They've never had to crawl through their own ruins to rebuild." Around him, the younger commanders straightened, the spark of belief igniting where despair had loomed above. The sky flickered with fire as more alien ships fell, their wreckage streaking across the heavens like false stars. Humanity had given its answer to the first strike. The war for Earth had begun not as the hegemony imagined, but as only humanity could fight it, ugly, desperate, and devastatingly effective. The streets of New York burned. From the shattered skyline, towering columns of smoke twisted upward, black against the dawn. Alien dropships swept low, sleek shapes of silver and bone that hissed plasma into the city blocks below. Whole avenues cracked open, steel melting, concrete liquefying in rivers of fire. Civilians fled in every direction, screaming, stumbling, clutching what little they could carry. Above it all, the alien fleet hung like carrion birds, waiting for the carcass to stop twitching. Sergeant Elena Torres crouched behind the wreckage of a collapsed overpass, her rifle clutched tight against her chest. Her squad was gone, scattered, or dead in the first bombardments, but she was still breathing, still fighting. Blood trickled from a cut above her eye, and her arms shook from exhaustion, yet her grip never wavered. She stared through the cracked visor of her helmet at the enemy patrol sweeping the rubble-strewn street ahead. 6 tall figures in segmented armor, their crystalline limbs glinting faintly in the smoke. Torres exhaled, whispering to the handful of survivors huddled with her. "Wait for my signal." They were shopkeepers, college kids, retirees who had picked up rifles from abandoned police stations. Their hands trembled, but their eyes held the same fire that burned in hers. Humanity had always fought with more than weapons. They fought with stubbornness. On the other side of the continent, in the underground laboratories of Colorado, Dr. Amina Khan tightened a bolt on the massive railgun frame they had salvaged from a military museum. It had been designed in another century, tested, shelved, and forgotten. But under her hands it lived again, powered by the guts of scavenged power plants and shielded by concrete bunkers. Generators roared as the coils charged, the whole room vibrating with the hum of potential. She looked at the technicians and soldiers around her. "This isn't a relic anymore. This is our spear." Back in New York, Torres gave the signal. A Molotov cocktail arced high through the smoky air, shattering against the lead alien's armor in a burst of fire. The patrol spun in confusion, plasma rifles glowing as they sought targets. Then the rifles of her militia cracked, the sharp pop of gunpowder lost in the chaos. The aliens had thought humans too primitive to pose a threat. They had not expected gunfire from 10 angles at once, nor grenades lobbed down from the wreckage above. 2 aliens fell, crystalline torsos splintering, their lights sputtering out. The survivors retreated, leaving behind smoking fragments. Torres pressed her back against the wall, chest heaving. Around her, the civilians who had fired their first shots in anger began to cheer in disbelief. She cut them off with a barked order. "Don't celebrate, reload. They'll be back with more." Her voice was hoarse, but it carried command. For the first time in hours, the people around her obeyed without hesitation. General Marcus Hawley received the report in the Colorado bunker, eyes narrowing as the field map updated with faint pockets of resistance glowing red in the occupied cities. Small victories, sparks against a storm, but sparks could become fire. "We don't stop," he murmured, recalling the words he had drilled into his soldiers for decades. He knew this war would cost more than blood. It would cost everything. Yet humanity had always paid in full. That night, the first alien transport in Manhattan was brought down not by missiles or lasers, but by a construction crane rigged with explosives. In Paris, guerrilla fighters used the catacombs to emerge beneath alien patrols, vanishing back underground before counterfire could land. In the ruins of Tokyo, teenagers hijacked delivery drones and strapped them with makeshift charges, turning them into buzzing swarms of death. The hegemony commanders sneered at these tactics, calling them undisciplined, barbaric, beneath the standards of civilized war. Yet their casualty reports grew thicker by the day. Every street became a maze of ambushes, every city a bleeding trap. The more they pressed, the more the humans adapted. In the bunker, Dr. Khan's railgun fired for the first time. A thunderclap tore through the mountains as a slug the size of a telephone pole screamed into the sky. Hours later, an alien cruiser above New Mexico blossomed into fire, torn in half by a weapon powered with nothing more exotic than electricity and steel. Sergeant Torres sat in the thiel, flickering shadows of her ruined city, her rifle across her lap. Around her, the militia slept fitfully in broken buildings, their dreams haunted by fire. She stared at the stars where the enemy fleet hung like gods. Her lips curled into something that was not quite a smile. "You thought we'd roll over," she whispered to the night. "You thought wrong." The ashes of Earth did not smother its spirit. They fed it. And in that fire, a war was being born that would change the galaxy forever. The war spread like fire across the continents, and with it, the rhythm of human defiance. Where alien plasma tore cities apart, workshops hummed with new life in hidden tunnels, barns, abandoned subway stations, and forgotten bunkers. Humanity's past, its relics, its obsolete weapons, its discarded ideas rose from the dust, repurposed into war machines. The galaxy had assumed those relics belonged in museums. Humanity proved them wrong. In the heart of the Appalachians, a cavern once used for coal mining thrummed with activity. Sparks cascaded from welding torches as engineers grafted alien alloys onto rusting tank hulls. Engines roared, belching smoke into the darkness. To outsiders it might have looked crude, barbaric even, but the men and women who worked with grease-streaked faces and calloused hands weren't making art, they were building monsters. When the bay doors opened at dawn, vehicles once meant for plowing fields or hauling freight rolled out armored in scavenged steel, their cannons bristling with repurposed naval guns. In South America, entire villages turned into armories. Grandmothers sat with children, carefully reloading brass casings by hand, whispering to them stories of old wars. Hunters taught city dwellers how to rig traps with wire and pressure plates. What the hegemony called technological regression, humanity called survival. Dr. Amina Khan stood in front of a chalkboard in an underground lab, diagrams scrawled across every inch. Around her were a mix of soldiers, hackers, and machinists, all leaning in as she tapped her chalk against the board. They expect us to play by their rules: shields, plasma, quantum targeting. But we don't need any of that. We fight the way we've always fought, turning whatever we have into weapons. She pointed at the schematic of a communications satellite. This bird hasn't worked since 2034. We retrofit it with a mass driver core, give it a spin, and suddenly it's not junk. It's a kinetic spear. A grizzled sergeant raised a brow. And if the calculations are off? Khan shrugged, exhaustion shadowing her face. Then it misses? But I'd rather fire and miss than sit here and die waiting. Above Tokyo, alien reconnaissance ships swept low, their scanners probing for heat signatures. They found nothing. But as they banked toward Shinjuku, an eruption of light flared from a tower that had once broadcast television signals. The tower's antenna, hastily converted into a directional EMP cannon, speared the ship with a pulse of raw energy. The alien craft stuttered mid-air, its elegant systems collapsing in chaos. Seconds later, it crashed into the bay, swallowed by fire and steam. On the rooftops, civilians cheered, their fists raised to the sky. In Paris, the catacombs became war. Generations of bones rattled as hidden elevators carried up crates of old rifles relics from centuries past, oiled and ready. Men and women in gas masks darted through the tunnels, emerging through sewer grates and manholes to ambush alien patrols. Their weapons might have been antiques, but at close range, gunpowder was as lethal as plasma. And everywhere, humanity hacked. Students and hobbyists, coders and thieves, tore into alien networks with stolen tablets and jury-rigged servers. The invaders' elegant code, designed to repel sophisticated assaults, collapsed against the chaos of human ingenuity. Drone swarms were hijacked mid-flight, repurposed to crash into alien command posts. Orbital scans fed false data, leading entire platoons into ambushes. General Marcus Hawley observed these reports with a grim satisfaction. He stood before a war room screen glowing red with alien positions, blue with human resistance nodes. Each day the map had fewer red strongholds, more clusters of blue sparks. Humanity wasn't just fighting back, they were learning, adapting, becoming more dangerous with every loss. But with every adaptation came cost. Hawley knew the casualty numbers were rising faster than the victories. Millions gone. Cities flattened. Yet for every dead city, 5 more militias rose. The aliens did not understand it, how pain only hardened the human resolve. From his command, Spire in orbit, Admiral Krevther did understand, and it gnawed at him. Reports poured in of shattered patrols, sabotaged supply lines, ships falling from the sky not to advanced weaponry, but to railguns, mines, and orbital trash. They're scavengers, he hissed to his lieutenants, but scavengers with teeth. He turned toward Earth's scarred surface, with a new glint in his crystalline eyes, not amusement, but unease. On the ground, Sergeant Elena Torres climbed the gutted husk of a skyscraper, her boots crunching on broken glass. She raised binoculars toward the alien garrison squatting in Central Park, its walls pulsing with energy shields. Around her, the ragged fighters of her militia waited for her signal. In her pocket, she carried a thumb drive holding a virus written by a teenager who had once been a gamer. That virus would hijack the shield's frequency long enough for the stolen rocket launcher slung on her shoulder to do its job. Torres smiled faintly, a predator's smile, and lowered the binoculars. The galaxy thought Earth was easy prey. But Earth was teaching them the oldest lesson of all. Humans don't stop, they adapt. And when they fight with everything stone, steel, fire, and fury. The war ground on, and with it came the toll that no map or statistic could soften. Cities that had once glowed with neon and laughter were now wastelands of ash and twisted steel. From orbit, Earth looked less like a living world and more like a scarred battlefield, glowing with the fires of a species that refused to surrender. General Marcus. Hawley stood at the edge of a command post, buried deep beneath the Rockies. Reports cascaded across the screens in front of him, lists of civilian losses. Militia positions gone silent, hospitals leveled in strikes meant to break morale. His shoulders sagged under the weight, though he never let his officers see. He was a soldier forged in endless conflicts, but even he could feel the bone-deep ache of watching his species bled dry. Humanity's answer to every strike was to rise again, but Hawley knew the price was growing unbearable. In New York, Elena Torres staggered through a burned-out subway station, her boots echoing in the hollow dark. Her militia had launched a raid the night before, ambushing an alien supply convoy with improvised explosives and small arms fire. They had destroyed the convoy, yes, but only 3 of her fighters had made it back alive. She carried the weight of those who didn't in every step, her hands stained with ash and blood. When she reached the huddled survivors hiding in the tunnels, families, children, the old she forced her face into steel. She had no choice. They needed a leader, not grief. A boy no older than 12 tugged on her sleeve, eyes wide with fear. "Sergeant, are we winning?" The question cut deeper than any wound. She crouched, resting a hand on his shoulder. "We're still here," she said softly. "As long as we're still here, we're winning." The lie tasted bitter, but it lit a spark in the boy's eyes. That spark was enough. Across the ocean, Paris had fallen silent. The catacombs beneath the city were now tombs not just for bones centuries old, but for resistance fighters who had refused to yield. In Tokyo, plumes of radioactive smoke rose where an alien strike had leveled districts once teeming with life. In São Paulo, militias fought street by street, only to vanish under plasma fire that turned entire neighborhoods to glass. From his vantage aboard the Dominion's claw, Admiral Krevther surveyed the destruction with satisfaction that curdled at the edges. His fleets had unleashed devastation unmatched in hegemony history, yet the reports kept coming: ambushes, sabotage, humans fighting back with weapons so crude they should have been irrelevant. He replayed footage of a militia in Nairobi, farmers with bolt-action rifles, holding a line against armored walkers until their last breath, buying time for civilians to escape. Their sacrifice had crippled his advance for days. Krevther could not understand it. Most species broke under the first taste of annihilation. Humanity seemed to draw strength from it. In the Colorado bunker, Hale slammed a fist onto the table as casualty numbers scrolled across the screen. "We can't keep this up," one of his aides whispered. Hale looked at her with eyes that carried decades of war. "We don't have to keep it up," he said. "We just have to keep going long enough." It was then the reports shifted. Alien commanders, once smug, now whispered of human unpredictability, of entire regiments refusing to die even when surrounded. One battle on the plains of Kansas saw 1,000 civilians with hunting rifles hold off a mechanized division for 12 hours. The aliens won the ground, but lost their commander and half their armored walkers. It was victory that felt like defeat. Sergeant Torres sat among her ragged militia, cleaning her rifle by firelight in the ruins of a library. She looked at the faces of those who followed her, the same people who had lost families, homes, entire lives, and saw no despair, only grim resolve. The blood price was higher than any war she had imagined, but it had forged something the aliens could not break. From the stars, Krevther finally admitted what his officers would not. This was no harvest. This was a war of attrition, and humanity was not fighting to win battles. They were fighting to endure. Every loss carved their resolve sharper. Every death was a promised dot as the night deepened across the shattered cities of Earth. Hale watched the stars through a narrow slit of the bunker. His voice was low, meant only for himself. "They think bleeding us will end this war. They don't understand." He closed his eyes, hearing in memory the voices of every war he had survived. "We have always bled. That's why we never stop." The galaxy had expected a species that would crumble under fire. Instead, they had found something terrifying, a species that grew stronger the more it suffered. Humanity was paying in blood, but that blood was etching a truth into the stars the hegemony could no longer ignore. The humans would not break. The first time humanity struck back beyond the atmosphere, the night sky blazed with falling stars that were not stars at all. In the fortified bunkers of Colorado, General Marcus Heil stood with his officers as screens filled with telemetry feeds. Grainy camera footage showed the impossible. Hijacked alien transports rising from makeshift launch pads, flames belching from engines jury-rigged by human mechanics who had learned alien systems through trial, error, and sheer desperation. Hale's jaw tightened. It was reckless, insane, and yet it was working. Dr. Amina Khan leaned against the rail beside him, exhaustion carving deep shadows beneath her eyes. "We don't have a fleet," she said, "so we build one out of their bones." The words were not metaphor. The ships clawing their way toward orbit were patchworks of stolen alien tech welded onto human frames, freighters turned into battering rams, shuttle husks reinforced with steel plating, bristling with scavenged cannons above the Earth. Admiral Krevther watched the movement on his displays with disbelief. "Impossible," he muttered, mandibles clicking. "They lack slipstream drives. They lack quantum cores. How are they in orbit?" His officers whispered in dismay as human icons flickered onto the tactical maps. Crude, small, fragile, yet undeniably there. The first clash came swift and brutal. A human ship, once an alien dropship, its cargo bay stuffed with explosives, hurtled toward a hegemony frigate. The frigate fired, energy bolts tearing chunks of metal from its hull, but the craft did not veer away. It rammed headlong, detonating in a white-hot bloom that shattered the frigate into molten fragments. Krevther staggered in fury as debris glittered across the void. They dare contaminate the stars with barbarism. He roared. Yet beneath his fury, a thread of unease coiled. Sergeant Elena Torres watched the battle from Earth through a battered field display. She sat with her militia in the ruins of Central Park, the alien garrison still glowing on the horizon. For weeks, their fight had been to hold the ground beneath their feet. Now, for the first time, she watched humans strike above the atmosphere, and her chest ached with something unfamiliar. Hope. "We can reach them," she whispered, the words barely audible. Around her, her fighters lifted their heads, seeing what she saw. "We can fight them anywhere." In orbit, one of Khan's greatest gambles came alive. A railgun the length of a skyscraper, bolted together from shipyard scraps and powered by a reactor stolen from a downed cruiser, rotated slowly in its cradle above New Mexico. Engineers called it Zeus, and when it fired, the world trembled. A tungsten slug, accelerated to a fraction of light speed, screamed through the void and tore a hegemony destroyer apart in a single surgical stroke. The explosion lit the horizon like a new dawn. Across the hegemony fleet, shock rippled. These weren't random acts of defiance anymore. This was coordination. This was strategy. General Hale's voice cut through the command center like steel. They thought we couldn't reach them. They were wrong. Now they bleed where they thought themselves untouchable. His officers, haggard and battered, stood straighter. The war was still costing them everything, but for the first time, the invaders were retreating, not advancing. Admiral Krevher watched his fleet recoil, half his forward line in ruins. He slammed a claw against the tactical display, crystalline shards cracking with the force. "They are primitives," he shouted, but even as the words left him, he felt them hollow. Primitive fleets did not tear destroyers apart with scavenged weapons. Primitive minds did not hijack transports, weld bombs to their hulls, and ride them into glory. On Earth, bonfires burned in the ruins of cities. Militias danced in the glow, singing songs of defiance passed down through centuries. For the first time since the war began, the sound of laughter echoed through shattered streets. Humanity had not just endured, they had struck back, and in that moment, somewhere deep in his bones, Marcus Halley understood this was only the beginning. The galaxy thought Earth weak, thought humanity had reached too far by stepping into space. But Earth had just proven it could make war in the stars as savagely and brilliantly as it did on the ground. The counterstroke had begun. The sky above Earth boiled with fire. Dozens of dreadnoughts, vast and glittering with crystalline armor, broke through the black of space and lined the heavens like an iron curtain. Their arrival blotted out constellations, their drive searing the upper atmosphere in streaks of white-blue fury. The hegemony had grown tired of the resistance. This was no longer an occupation. This was extermination. Admiral Krevther stood on the command dais of the Dominion's claw, his mandibles rigid, his eyes gleaming with cold resolve. "No more harvests. No more containment," he hissed. "The humans will be made example. Burn their nests. Salt their seas. Let every world in the hegemony witness what happens when primitives defy us." His fleet captains pulsed with fear and obedience, their harmonics trembling as they prepared their fire. On the ground, General Marcus Hale felt the tremors as alien energy beams lanced down, scorching entire valleys into glass. He braced his fists against the command table in the Colorado bunker, the walls shivering with distant impacts. "They're committing everything," an aide whispered. Hale's gaze was flint. "Then so are we." Humanity's answer was madness, born of desperation and sharpened by centuries of surviving on the edge. Across the world, caches of fuel were detonated in orchestrated patterns, massive oil reserves, gas fields, even chemical plants. From orbit, Krevthur watched as whole regions of the planet erupted in plumes of fire, seas of burning oil spreading across coastlines. They scorched themselves, one of his officers cried, appalled. But the admiral felt the truth twist in his chest. This was no accident. This was a trap. Alien divisions advancing into the Middle East found themselves consumed by infernos that stretched horizon to horizon, their armored walkers sinking into tar pits turned to flame. In Siberia, ice fields shattered under buried nuclear charges, collapsing into oceans that swallowed transports whole. In the ruins of Berlin, human fighters drew alien forces deep into the catacombs before detonating the entire district, burying invaders under thousands of tons of rubble. Sergeant Elena Torres crouched with her militia in the dark beneath, Manhattan staring at the detonator in her hand. Above, the largest alien garrison on the eastern seaboard pulsed with shields and searchlights. Around her, the eyes of her people glowed with exhaustion and resolve. "We won't survive this," one whispered. Torres nodded. "No, but they'll never hold this city again." She pressed the switch. The ground convulsed as buried fusion charges lit the night. Central Park vanished in a roar of light, the alien fortress collapsing into fire that reached the clouds. From orbit, Krevthur recoiled as his fleet's sensors howled with loss. Dozens of his ground regiments had gone dark. Entire sectors were falling not to superior weapons, but to annihilation at the hands of those who would rather die than kneel. For the first time in his long career, the Admiral's crystalline eyes flickered with something alien to him. Fear dot in the Colorado bunker. Halle watched as casualty counters climbed into the millions. His lips pressed into a thin, bloodless line. He had ordered detonations that scarred the planet he loved, sacrificed soldiers who knew they would not return. He bore it like stone. "They think this is their breaking point," he muttered. "They don't understand. For humanity, this is where we begin. Above the earth, the unthinkable happened." The dreadnought line faltered, not from lack of firepower, but from hesitation. Krevthur's captains, unnerved by the human suicidal resolve, began to withdraw from low orbit. A dreadnought rocked as a railgun slug, fired from the Zeus cannon in New Mexico, smashed through its flank. Another was crippled by a hijacked transport packed with warheads, driven straight into its hull by a screaming human pilot who never intended to return. The Admiral stared at the chaos, his claws digging into the command rail. This was no war, he recognized. This was not conquest. It was a death pact, a species choosing annihilation over submission. And against such madness, what victory was possible? On the ground, in the ash and smoke, Elena Torres staggered from the rubble with a handful of survivors. Her body was scorched, her uniform torn, but her eyes burned as fiercely as the fires consuming the city. She raised her rifle to the sky, where alien ships retreated in broken formation. Around her, other humans emerged from shadows, bloodied but unbroken, their cries of defiance carrying into the night. Humanity had reached its breaking point, but instead of shattering, they had turned it into a weapon, and the galaxy would never look at them the same again. The War Council chamber aboard the Dominion's Claw was silent. The air itself seemed frozen as Admiral Krevthur stood before the gathered captains, his crystalline frame casting fractured shadows across the walls. Outside the viewport, Earth still burned smoldering continents, oceans streaked with oil fire, cities reduced to embered bones. Yet the planet still lived. And worse, the humans still fought. "This is not conquest," Krevthur rasped, his mandibles trembling with restrained fury. "This is madness. They have lost billions. Their cities lie in ruin. Yet they rise again, each time fiercer, each time more cunning. He struck the command rail with one claw, the sound sharp as shattering glass. Why will they not break? No captain answered. They had all seen it. Armored walkers drowned in fire, dreadnoughts shattered by ramming craft, entire regiments swallowed by detonations, triggered by humans who did not care if they survived. There was no surrender, no plea, no collapse into submission. The more the humans bled, the harder they struck. Reports began to filter in from hegemony xenohistorians, dredged from archives long ignored. They spoke of a world scarred not just by alien fire, but by its own history. Ice ages that had frozen continents, plagues that had culled populations by the millions, wars that had spanned the globe. They have faced extinction, one scholar whispered, not once, but countless times. Each age, they staggered to the brink, and then clawed their way back. Krevther listened in silence as the records unfolded. Nuclear brinkmanship in the 20th century whole arsenals of death aimed inward, yet the species endured. Cities turned to ash in firestorms, yet rebuilt in months. Even the fall of empires, the collapse of civilizations, only hardened them. Humanity's story was not progress. It was survival through catastrophe, again and again. On Earth, General Marcus Howell stood among the survivors in the Colorado bunker. His uniform was ragged, his hair silvered with ash, but his voice carried like iron as he addressed those gathered. They thought breaking our cities would end us. They thought killing our people would silence us. But we are not defined by what we lose. We are defined by what we refuse to surrender. They will leave, and they will remember. Humanity does not break. Sergeant Elena Torres leaned against the ruins of a wall in Manhattan, her rifle resting across her knees. Around her, children scavenged through rubble for food. Soldiers patched wounds with torn shirts. Engineers rewired dead drones into crude defenses. She looked at the sky where the alien fleet had begun to pull back, not in triumph, but in disbelief. Her voice was hoarse, but steady. They'll never understand. To us, suffering isn't the end. It's the forge. Krevther, alone in his quarters, reviewed the final reports. His claws trembled as he whispered into the stillness. They are not a primitive world. They are a war species, forged by calamity, tempered by loss. He stared at the blue planet below, its scars glowing like molten seams, and felt something he had not felt in centuries. Dash Dread. The hegemony fleet broke orbit in silence, their formation ragged, their purpose shattered. They had not been defeated by superior weapons, nor by numbers. They had been defeated by will, by a species that embraced death as the price of freedom, and wore suffering as a second skin dot in the streets of broken cities. Survivors lifted their voices. No anthem, no organized cry, just the raw sound of life that refused to be extinguished. It rolled across continents, a chorus of defiance that reached even the stars. And in the archives of the hegemony, a new entry was written in red: Earth not to be occupied, not to be harvested, not to be conquered. A warning. Engagement with this species risks extinction. They do not yield. They prove you wrong. General Hall stood on a ruined balcony, watching dawn break through smoke. His whisper carried only to himself, though the world seemed to echo it. Let them come again, if they dare. We'll still be here. The galaxy had thought invading Earth would be easy. Humanity had proved them wrong.